we do dumb stuff. I mean, there are people who are afraid of vaccines, despite the evidence that it doesn't cause autism and stuff, who leave their kids subject to diseases because their fear doesn't match the evidence. So the fear is valid, and I understand parents being afraid for their kids and stuff, but that's an oops. That's an oops.
Risk perception and risk management may not be on the top of everyone's beach reading pile, but the misperception of risk can lead to huge misallocations of resources that probably increases our net risk of harm. David Ropeik, a former broadcast journalist and lecturer at Harvard, is out with a new book, How Risky Is It Really? Why Our Fears Don't Always Match the Facts, that goes through some of the most egregious misperceptions of risk and the consequences that this can have. The book is written in a relatively non-technical conversational style, complete with the right quotes from George Carlin and other important cultural anthropologists. I caught up with David recently, almost literally underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, and spent a few minutes talking with him about the subject.
So when I was a TV reporter, I covered countless stories where people would be way afraid of something or way not afraid of something that was germane to the story, airbags or child abduction or silicone breast implants or chemicals or whatever. And then I'd go to the experts and they would go, here are the facts, and there'd be this huge gap. We're too afraid or not afraid enough. So I realized that there's this consistency. It didn't matter what the risk was. Oops, we are constantly getting risk wrong. And I actually studied up on it, found it fascinatingly relevant to how people behave, including myself. Why do we make these oopsie mistakes? So when I get out of TV news but still think of myself as a communicator, I thought, wow, the world could use that knowledge. I mean, if you know how you make your decisions about risk and how the underlying psychology might lead you to mistakes that are bad for you, wouldn't you want to read about that? If we're really afraid of X, we tell the government, protect us from X. And in a democracy, it kind of has to respond to that kinda, right? And so we protect ourselves from what we're afraid of, but sometimes that's not what we're at risk from. So America, I would argue, this may be somewhat provocative, is cancer phobic. More afraid of cancer than the data says we need to. It's the second leading cause of death in America. It's way bad. But heart disease is way bigger, and we're not nearly as afraid of that. Oops, we spend way more on cancer than heart disease. Oops. People who are suffering the risk of heart disease are greater risk as a result of the perception gap about policy.